Welcome back to the Daily Vent. Next topic on the list of notes here. The delocalization of culture. There are less folk heroes now and more celebrities. Social media has taken us further out of a local community-focused mindset. As a result, we tend to more care about the bigger things rather than the things that may be happening directly around us. Physical proximity has been more nullified. I think the idea here is that if you look in kind of history of these different kind of folk hero characters that were kind of like local legends, but not necessarily national level legends. In some cases, they might have been if they were like a really big deal of a folk hero. But like, how often do they enter like the main cultural lens for people? Because you might not learn about some of these folk heroes until you start getting more into like the nitty gritty stories rather than the larger headlines that are present to the general population of a country, right? So like, is there a reason why? Because like, when was the last time that you heard about a local folk hero, right? You may have heard of a couple, right? But do we have like these local folk hero legends commonly anymore? And like, who knows, maybe were they ever that common? I'd like to think that they used to be more common. I could be wrong. But part of why, if you want to think big picture, part of why the concept of the local folk hero may have like kind of disappeared or vanished is that maybe it's because you have all this social media and mass media and like kind of Hollywoodified culture that is all about, like, as I mentioned here, as a result we tend to care, as a result we tend to more care about the bigger things rather than the things that may be happening directly around us. Physical proximity has been more nullified. So we may, as a result of this mass media, the TV, the phone, social media, etc., we may no longer be as connected to our local communities that are literally right around us. And so, and even if you're in a city, this might be even worse because it might be a bit harder to get more connected to what is locally going on because there's just so much of everything happening. There's just so much of it. Whereas if you're in a small town, maybe it's a bit easier to be like more connected and involved and directly a part of the local community because it's smaller scale. Maybe that makes it a bit easier. So you have this, so both the size of the place that you live as well as like the kind of ways that media is translated now. Like how many people are like chronically online or chronically on your phone, chronically on social media, always kind of involved in the TV and what the TV is saying. So then as a result, the people that you might become more familiar with might be like more of like the celebrity type of the news, broadcast people, the stories that they're talking about, social media stuff, the big names on there. And then as a result, maybe you're like not as focused on local stuff happening. So then what becomes the main talking points all the time is what such and such a celebrity did today or whatever, right? And some people might cringe at this concept, right? If you're not really a fan of all that stuff, and fair enough, So if we never had gotten social media and if mass media didn't take over in the way that it did, maybe we would have more of those local folk hero stories because you'd have like Billy Bob Joe and his dog that like saved some people from a bear attack, and it would have been like, wow, that's a big news story, that's a big deal. And maybe in some places that still is a big deal, but how often does that get more drowned out by like blah 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 breaking news about etc forever war happening somewhere overseas, like, and it's always like everything has been like embiggened, like everything is big, everything is always these big stories, these big things, and it's almost like you could argue that with mass media and social media and everything else and the interconnectedness of everything, that everything is always like it's like everything's kind of been like so sped up over the last couple decades compared to like the flow of information like the 50s. And so then as a result, like everything is like big things, big stories, big stuff happening all the time. And it's like with all this big stuff and you get so used to hearing about these big things happening all the time or whatever, that maybe local little small stories about how some dude and his dog saved people from a bear attack no longer really seems like a big idea in light of this crazy war happening here and then happening there and then this person getting assassinated and then blah blah blah, so then it kind of drowns out any of the smaller stories that might have a big local significance and local impact, but as a result of our senses for what's happening in physically close to us, like physical proximity to us, that's kind of getting drowned out by the interconnectedness of everything, of where like before, cell phones and all this stuff, if you just receive stuff through the paper, or letter mail or whatever, or the radio, then you might have like just heard like the broadcast occasionally, and maybe it took a while for information to get across the pond or whatever. So then maybe you were naturally more focused because you had maybe more brain space, more time to be concerned about what's happening in physical proximity, because that might have been most of what was available, was what was in physical proximity around you. And then now it's like, man, you put a phone in somebody's hand, they could just be like connected to everything going on in the world like 24/7, right? So all this stuff maybe just kind of killed the concept a little bit, or made it a bit harder, a bit more difficult to have these local stories feel significant, right? And you can't really remedy that, because it's almost like the ways of conveying information have changed, like the methods of spreading information and the methods of like what's considered like common formats for entertainment and everything is different now. So it's like times change. That's basically what it is. It's like the classic saying, right? And so then, can you turn back the clock, so to speak? Not in any kind of like normal way, and like how you could expand that is, you're not going to turn back the clock naturally by people just being like you're not going to have a country unanimously being like, you know what, we're all just kind of done with social media now. We're going to go back to like just being involved in our normal communities. It's probably going to be more likely that you would turn back the clock if there was like an EMP strike that took out all of like the phones, and you couldn't. It's like the only way that it would go back for everybody, or for most people in that kind of way, would be if like you couldn't do the normal standard way now of consuming information. And most people would probably agree that like an EMP strike would not be a good thing, because even if you just look at like the havoc it would wreak in other areas beyond just like, oh no, the Wi-Fi's down, Maybe like to summarize, one of the things that might be the like mostly about the biggest bummer is that it's kind of sad maybe for people to be kind of so disconnected from their local community and the people around them. Especially like, how many people have seen a scenario where you have like the whole family, or you see a whole family at a restaurant and everybody's on their phone? I personally haven't witnessed this on like a large enough scale. Like I might see like a person on their phone at the restaurant, but like I'm not out at restaurants a whole lot right now. But like I've heard this thing said, or I've heard people talk about like the kids are on their phones, their iPads or whatever, when they're out, And so it's like, if that's true, then that's maybe, like if that's true and if that's commonly true, that you have like a bunch of the family at a restaurant and all on their own devices and not like living and talking with one another in that real way, physical proximity kind of way, then that's just maybe kind of a sad reality of where we've gotten to as a society. Like, has everything become colder? Like, is there less warmth in the interaction with the average person now? Like, how many people on the bus or the train or the subway are talking to each other like strangers, just talking to each other about stuff going on? How many people are actually doing that now versus like just, okay, I'm just going to keep my headphones on, look at my phone the whole time I'm on the bus, the whole time I'm on the train, the whole time I'm on the plane, whatever. Like, how many people are just like interacting like normal human beings regularly with each other in public? And does that ruin the dating scene as well, when you have people that are like kind of like antisocial by proximity. Not that they're necessarily per se always trying to not talk to people, but just that they might not gravitate towards that as much because they find what's on their phone more interesting, right? It's like, it'd be kind of cool to see what it was like in like the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. Like, to be able to go back to that time period, or the 50s, whatever, pick a time period pre-2009 or so, like when the smartphones started coming out. Pick a time, because you could even argue that like early 2000s when you had social media, but you had to be at home on the computer to be on the social media, or you had to have a laptop in a public area that had Wi-Fi connectivity to be on the social media. Even in that time, you could probably make the argument that things were still significantly better in the examples that I'm talking about here. So like, if you could go back to the pre-smartphone eras and just be like, what was normal life like? Like, if you watch the show Frasier, when he's out at the coffee shop, like, there's a kind of a cool vibe to it. Like, just everybody's like, just like out at this coffee shop, and sure, maybe it's like a coffee shop bookstore. Like it's just a cool looking place. Are people like this personable with each other? You know, like, was everybody kind of interacting with each other? Or was everything still just a bunch of little cliques? Maybe it depends on the community or where you go to. But it's like, wasn't that like a cool time just for like social interaction? Because you kind of didn't really have any other choice or option unless you're like reading a magazine or something, or the newspaper, or unless you're just kind of like maybe listening to your cassette tape Walkman and just kind of staring at the wall, or staring down, or looking down at your coffee. Like, you know, just you maybe looked a bit more antisocial if you're just doing this the whole time, right? As opposed to like, now it's almost maybe because so many people are on their smartphones, it's maybe not viewed as antisocial because everybody's doing it. But does that make it good, though? Anyway, I'll probably leave that there. So, we should, regardless of whether we have folk heroes or not anymore, do, like, live well. Live well, you know? Until next time,